Shalom kulam. Welcome everyone. This week's shiur is on the topic, what are olives? What I mean by that is, how are olives used in terms of halakhic measurements? Halakha is the uh, code of Jewish law. So in this shiur, we'll delve into the important topic of halakhic measurements. First, what are the most common measurements and what are they used for? Secondly, how are they defined? And then, what are the practical consequences of misusing them? So first, an introduction. The written law, the Torah shebichtav, enumerates many positive and negative commandments concerning food. For example, we're commanded to eat matzah on Passover, and likewise we're forbidden from eating meat from non-kosher animals. However, the written Torah does not tell us what amount of food is required or forbidden, or indeed whether there is even a specific amount. The oral law, also called Torah Shebe'al Peh, does establish specific measurements which are used to determine whether or not one has fulfilled a positive commandment or is, heaven forbid, liable for punishment for having transgressed a negative commandment. These measurements, called shi'urim, are the topic of this paper. For example, in general, and regarding the most common forbidden foods, one is liable for punishment only after consuming the amount called a kazait, which is presented in Laws of Forbidden Foods 14.1. Nevertheless, consuming any amount of such food is forbidden. Likewise, one may not say a blessing after eating unless one has eaten at least this amount, in other words, a kazait. One who did not eat a sufficient quantity of food, but nevertheless said an after blessing, transgresses the biblical prohibition of taking God's name in vain, and that's brought in Laws of Blessings 1:15. It's clearly important to know what these measurements are in modern practical terms. So what are the most common ones and their uses? In practical terms, the most commonly used measurements are the one we mentioned already, the kazait, that's how you spell it in Hebrew, which means literally an olive's bulk, or actually like an olive. And this is the minimum amount which is considered eating. Next, we have the besa, which is an egg's bulk, which is the minimum size of a meal. Then there's the revi'it, which is a quarter of, literally means a quarter, and is a quarter of another measurement called the log, which is the minimum amount considered drinking. Then we move on to distances. Tefah, which is a span, a measure of distance, which is 4 fingers, and a finger is a thumb. It's approximately 8 centimeters, and this is brought in the Laws of Sefer Torah 9:9. Next up, we have Amah, plural is Amot, which is a cubit, and that is 6 tfahim, and in modern measures, that's just less than a half meter. And finally, for measurements that are you will encounter or that are important to know about, the mil, which is basically a Roman mile, or referred to as 2,000 amma, just less than 1 kilometer. And that's brought in Laws of Prayer and Priestly Blessing 4.2. And in addition to being used as a distance measurement, it's also used as a time measurement when the expression, the time it takes to walk a mil, is used. The first 3 measurements we mentioned are commonly used to determine whether one has fulfilled an obligation, for example, of eating enough matzah on Pesach, and is thus required to say a blessing, or conversely, has not eaten or drunk enough to require a blessing, thus rendering any blessing a vain blessing, bracha levatala. The latter 3 determine such things as the minimum and maximum sizes of a sukkah, what the kind of domain is for Shabbat purposes, and how far one may travel on Shabbat, among many other things. So, how are they defined? Rambam defines the Revi'it in Laws of Bikurim 6:13 and subsequent halachot. The translation is as follows. What is the full measure of a dough requiring a blessing on and separation of challah? The measure is a full omer of flour, whether from one of the 5 grains or from a mixture of them. They all contribute to the measure of an omer. So what is the measure of an omer? He says, 2 kabin less 1/5. So, okay, that doesn't tell me more. The kav is 4 login. The log is 4 revi'iyot. Remember that we mentioned the revi'it at the top. And the revi'it is 2 fingers by 2 fingers by 2 fingers and half a finger and a fifth of a finger. This is measures given in anthropomorphic measurements because they didn't have the standards committees we have today. All the fingers mentioned are the width of the thumb of the hand. And how much does this measure, the omer, hold? The omer holds about 3 and 40, in other words, 43, average eggs and a fifth of an egg. This is the weight. He's giving a weight comparison here of 6 and 80, in other words, 86, slaim, and 2/3 selah of Egyptian wheat flour, which is alternatively the weight of 520 zuz of the Egyptian zuzim of the present time. In other words, when Rambam lived in Egypt. A measure which contains about this weight of this kind of wheat flour may be used for measuring for the obligation of separation of challah in all locations. So where does he come up with this? The source for this is Rabbi Hisda's view in the Talmud Psahim 109a. And it says there, Rav Hisda said, the Torah's Revi'it measures 2 fingers by 2 fingers by 2 fingers and half a finger and a fifth of a finger, exactly as Rambam quotes. So it's clear then that a Revi'it is a measure of volume rather than weight, because the comparison to weight is based solely on a specific kind of flour which was available in his location and at that time. His explanation also touches on the size of the besan that elaborates further in Laws of Shabbat 8:6. For being liable for heaping food, the measure is a grogeret, which is a dried fig. The egg spoken of everywhere is a medium-sized chicken's egg. And anywhere it says enough fire or heat to cook an egg, it means enough to cook a grogeret amount of the egg. And the grogeret is 1/3 of an egg. Okay. Now, with all this discussion of measurements, and considering the importance of the kazait in halakha, it's informative Rambam does not give anywhere exact measurements for the kazait, nor in fact does he give an exact measurements for the besan. Instead, they were established by our sages, zichronam levracha, as measurements, because everyone knew how big an egg and an olive were. They were used by everyone, so literally everyone had an idea of what was meant. Of course, this is true at the time of the Mishnah, around 200 of the Common Era, and in the Middle East, where they were all living. When you move forth northern climes like Poland and so forth, it's likely that olives were not easily available. Anyway, the medium-sized chicken egg, according to Rav Na'eh, who's a modern investigator of these sorts of issues, the medium-sized chicken egg, according to Rav Na'eh, is 58 cubic centimeters. And according to Hazon Ish, who's also a very commonly referred to decizer on these matters, it's 100 cc's. So there's quite a difference between 58 and 100. So let's see. According to a calculator I found online, the weight of medium eggs in Israel is between 53 and 63 grams. That's the standard for a medium chicken egg, according to the site. Given that eggs are more dense than water with a density of about 1.03 grams per cubic centimeter, that equates to a volume between 51.5 and 61 cc's. So according to this, Reb Na'eh is at the top of that range, but he's credibly within that range, whereas the Chazon Ish is far beyond it. Okay, there is an argument that people make, but perhaps our eggs are smaller than those of Talmudic times. That is an argument that people make. However, the consensus I received from egg experts, and yes, I have contacted egg experts that I contacted, is that eggs today are most likely larger than in Talmudic times. Dr. Guy Barbato of Pennsylvania State University wrote to me and he said, I can say with considerable certainty that egg size has increased since the domestication of the chicken. This has been due mostly for direct selection of egg mass. And my comment is, this is unsurprising, since we've long domesticated produce and animals for those features we find desirable, and the process takes some time. So people want eggs that are bigger and contain more egg for their money, so we've bred chickens to produce larger eggs. Given this information, it's probable that Talmudic medium chicken eggs were no larger than 55 cc at the most. Note that I give a volume rather than a weight as per the laws of Hamis and Masal 512, where he says, and how much is the measure of halah? About 43 and a fifth eggs, like the volume of a medium egg, not the weight. So what then about the kazait? Again, I wrote to several experts, but Dr. Mordechai Kislev gave me the most exhaustive and definitive answer. In the article he sent me, he states there are three major varieties of olive cultivated in Israel. Now, it should be known there are actually very many varieties of olives cultivated in Israel, but there are three major varieties. These varieties have sizes which are different and can be categorized as small, medium, and large, exactly as the Mishnah and Talmud describe olive sizes. Of further interest is that the Talmud says the mid-sized olive is called aguri, which means one which holds on to, because it retains its oil. Of the three major olive varieties grown in Israel, the middle variety is the one which gives the best oil yield. The article also mentions that all three varieties of cultivated olives have been found in archaeological digs in Israel from about the period of the sages. We can be quite confident that today's Israeli olives are not substantially different from those of ancient times. These three varieties are the Nabali, which averages about 5 cc's, the Suri, which is the middle one at 3 cc's, and the Malisi at 1.75 cc's. These are average sizes. And these are indeed the olives mentioned in the Talmud, and therefore the measures with which we should be concerned. Therefore, the kazait is about 3 cc's, and not anywhere near the 27 cc's, or some say 33 and a third grams, given by modern poskim. A Suri olive only weighs between 3 and 5 grams depending on its ripeness. Regarding the Revi'it, using an average thumb of 2 centimeters width as per Reb Na'eh, my thumbs are 2.3 centimeters, which is squarely in the middle of the 2 to 2.5 centimeter range of adult human male thumb widths, modern adult human male thumb widths. Based on his value of 2 centimeters, a Revi'it is 86.4 cc's. Based on Hazon Ish, who uses a 2.4 centimeter thumb, which is at the high end, it's 149 cc's. This disparity in sizes is rather significant. And I have to say, it also has a strong bearing on whether you fulfilled your obligation or not when it comes to saying a bracha or an after bracha. Can we determine what an average thumb was in Mishnaic times? Well, not directly. Though humans in our region were slightly smaller then, So the range of thumb sizes might be 1.9 to 2.3 centimeters instead of the 2 to 2.5 that we have today. Given that we're measuring a volume, that still produces a wide range of values. So what do we do? But if we refer back to the omer required for chala measurement, we get an interesting result. An omer contains 28.8 riv'iyot when you go back and do all the conversions. It also contains about 43.2 eggs. If we assume a 55 cc egg as above, which we explained is about at the maximum size that Mishneh eggs probably were, then an omer is 2.376 cc's, in other words, 2 liters and 376 centiliters, and therefore the Revi'it is about 82.5 cc's, which gives a thumb of about 1.97 centimeters, about correct for the era and very close to Reb Na'eh's values. So, kol hakavod, Rav Na'eh, your investigation is right on the spot. Practical consequences. As mentioned, if one were to eat less than a kazait or drink less than a revi'it, but subsequently say a final blessing, that would be a transgression of making a blessing in vain, which is a Torah prohibition. Similarly, if on Pesach one were to drink less than a revi'it of wine, which can be mixed with water but must contain at least 25% wine, then one did not fulfill the obligation of drinking wine for Pesach. If one ate less than a kazait of malsan, and one did not fulfill the obligation of eating it. Of course, given that we've determined that a kazait is only 3 cc's, it's clear that one need not eat a third or a half of an entire malsan, so fulfilling the requirement is in fact rather easy. Regarding the distance measurements, 3 tfahim is the distance below which one thing is considered connected to another thing. So it defines the maximum distance the bottom of a sukkah wall can be from the ground, for instance, and this is in Laza Sukkot 4.4. Similarly, if a sukkah is taller than 20 amma, it's invalid. On Shabbat, one cannot walk 1,000 amma beyond the city boundaries according to rabbinic law. In other words, if he goes further than 1,000 amma, he's transgressing the rabbinic prohibition. But if he walked 12 mil beyond the city boundaries, then he's transgressed the Torah prohibition, and his punishment is stripes by Torah law. On Pesach, when mixing the dough for malsal, if one left it without mixing for the time it takes to walk 1 mil, then it is defined as hametz and must be destroyed. And this time to walk 1 mil is a question amongst all the different poskim. The most common the most common time used today is 18 minutes. The Rambam calls it 22 minutes. So you can pick whatever you want. If you want to be more machmir as far as mixing matzah, you can say 18 minutes. These measurements play a vital role in delimiting the permitted and the forbidden according to halakha, and therefore are important for us to learn and keep in mind. Thank you for participating in this shiur. We'll catch you next time.